When I was a young parent, I tried to teach my children to save money because that's what my parents taught me that their parents had taught them. And everyone knows that grandparents are the paragons of wisdom. But the more I've studied the world, and now that most of my children are away at college, I'm starting to realize that I probably could have taught them a little better. So this video is mostly for my children. Think of it as a supplement to what I taught you about money. These are the things that I think you really need to know and that I wish I had taught just a little bit better. When you save money, your wealth grows, but importantly, it grows linearly. That means if you plot the growth, it makes a straight line. For example, if you make $10,000 per week and you save 10% of everything you make, you will add $1,000 to your wealth every week. And that sounds pretty great, right? Well, sure, saving is great, but I want to focus on that linear growth thing. Are you happy with that? And if so, we really need to have a talk. Did you know that the value of money is always decreasing? And significantly, it's not decreasing linearly, it's decreasing exponentially. And did you know that money can earn interest? Now you might reply, sure, I knew all that, but inflation is a pretty small factor, isn't it? And my bank gives such absolutely lousy interest, it's barely even worth thinking about. And getting my money into some market that actually earns good interest is really such a great big bother. I'm just going to accumulate my wealth by saving. If so, then this, right here, this is what we really need to talk about. It's that thinking that interest doesn't really make all that big of a difference, that exponential growth is only a little bit better than linear growth, or that those tiny numbers from inflation and interest don't really have all that much of effect. This is what we really need to discuss today. Now, it's true that those numbers are small, and they don't have very much effect in the short term. But that kind of thinking is precisely what's so misleading about money. You can't think about money with your intuition. You really have to do the math. So let's do some math. Here's a plot of what saving about 10% of your income looks like. See how it makes a straight line? Okay, now let's suppose your bank gives an interest rate with an annual percentage yield of, say, 1%. By the way, that's a really poor interest rate, but banks give really poor interest rates, so it's kind of realistic. And that's because they're using your money to make themselves rich. As we examine these curves, you can see that saving grows your money a lot faster than interest in the short term. But now let's zoom out just a little bit. Still, it looks like saving is the way to go, but let's keep zooming out. And all of a sudden, something really weird happens. The account with the interest suddenly shoots up into the sky, and that saving strategy just keeps not making you rich. Isn't that interesting? Can you see the importance of leveraging compound interest? Principle 1. Saving makes you poor. Investing makes you rich. Poor people sell their time for money, and that makes their wealth grow linearly. Rich people don't do that. Rich people loan their money for interest. This makes their wealth grow exponentially. So which should you do? Well, you can't actually invest money until you have money, so you need to be doing both. But definitely don't just sell your time for money. That's a recipe for getting trapped, spending your whole life doing just that. Don't forget to invest. Now, for the sake of comparison, let's see what would happen if you could get a 3% annual percentage yield interest rate instead of that 1%. And let's also do a 5% interest rate as well. As you can see, the 3% interest rate makes you rich 3 times faster than the 1% interest rate. And the 5% interest rate makes you rich 5 times faster than that 1% interest rate. Principle 2. How you invest only affects how long it will take. Any interest rate at all will eventually overtake linear growth. But of course, sooner is preferable. As you can see, this math really isn't all that complex, so don't be scared of the math. And you really do need to take the time to digest this math, because doing the math is really the right way to manage money. Just using intuition will lead you to make very bad decisions with money. Principle 3. With money, intuition is misleading. Do the math. To illustrate how misleading intuition can be, did you just accept, based on that plot I just showed you, that interest is the secret to making you rich? If you did you notice that it takes more than 600 years for that 1% interest rate to make a whole lot of money? You don't even have 600 years to live, and it takes more than 200 years for that 3% interest rate to make you rich. So you might say, is it even possible to become rich in a lifetime? Well, if you understand the math, you'll see that these equations assume some rather silly things. For example, they assume we start out with exactly $1, and that savings line is based on the assumption you will make exactly $1 per year. These are absolutely ridiculous numbers, but I did that on purpose because I want to make another point. Principle 4, never trust someone else's math. Do it yourself. If you trust someone else's math, someone is probably ripping you off. The financial world is kind of cutthroat like that. I'm sorry, that's the world we live in. Math is your armor, so don't let it get rusty. As an experiment, let's look at what happens if we start with $1,000 instead of just $1. So I'll change the equation for that 1% interest account to 1,000 times 1 plus the annual percentage yield raised to the power of x, where x represents time. Notice how that 1% interest rate jumps way ahead of all the others. I mean, sure, that account that makes 5% interest will eventually overtake the 1% long after you're dead, but what good is that? In real life, if you want to make a lot of money, the secret is this: you need to invest a lot of money. Principle 5, it takes money to make money. Now, this is the principle nobody likes. It suggests that your past has a whole lot of influence on your future. It sucks that money is not all roses and sunshine. You just got to deal with that. I'm not trying to sell you on some get-rich-quick scheme. I'm trying to show you how the world really works. And the truth is, anyone can make a fortune if they start with a lot of money. And already you know how to do that. You just take that lot of money and you invest it. Voila, you're rich. But how do you actually make money if you don't have a lot of money to start with? That is a much more challenging and therefore interesting problem. And it's also the one that you face. You are starting your life deeply in debt. After all, you have to live somewhere, and that's expensive. Education is also expensive, and earning money takes time. So what do? As you should certainly know by now, my answer to almost everything involves learning. You study the world until you really understand how it works, then you know what to do. Principle 6, knowledge is power. And before we proceed, let me point out that you have 2 significant advantages in this world. Number 1, the knowledge I'm trying to give you right now. And number 2, time. You're young. Don't underestimate the value of that, and don't squander it, because time can turn power into money. But to do that, you do need to understand a bit about how things work. So let's talk about it. Here's a plot of the value of the Dow Jones Industrial Average over time. The patterns you see here are not unique to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I'm just using this as an example market. To prove that, here's a plot of the S&P 500. Now, what patterns do you see in these 2 markets? Don't be distracted by the up and down volatility in these charts. To an untrained eye, it may look like the market has become increasingly volatile over time, but that's actually just an illusion. You see, the volatility is proportional to the size of the market. What these charts really show us is that these markets have grown steadily over time. And significantly, that growth is not linear. The curvy shape of these charts shows us what's really happening. These markets are not growing by saving. They are growing by investing. And consequently, they are not growing incrementally. They are compounding. That's why the shape is not linear. It's approximately exponential. So the right thing to do with an exponential growth is to plot it on a logarithmic scale. Let's do that. Unfortunately, your math classes may not have actually taught you much about logarithms and exponentials as well as they probably should. This seems to be a blind spot in public education, so please let me supplement. Essentially, logarithms map from exponential to linear space. Notice how the vertical axes now grow with digits rather than with constant numerical values. So a logarithmic plot essentially turns exponential curves into straight lines. On this scale, we can better see what's actually happening in the markets. For example, now it's pretty clear that there has always been volatility. As is often said, change is the only constant. And there's an important lesson in that. If you ever find yourself getting burned by market volatility, don't panic, and especially don't flee the market. Just wait it out. Principle 7. The market always recovers in time. This also suggests that there is often wealth to be made in taking a contrarian position. When everyone else is buying, that's probably a good time to move to safer investments because you know the market will eventually correct itself. And when everyone else is panicking, maybe that's a good time to ask yourself, how can I exploit my knowledge that this too shall pass with time? Principle 8. Don't follow the herd. Next, let's consider some very wealthy people and see what trends we can observe. Perhaps one of the first patterns you might notice is that a large portion of them started out as entrepreneurs. Some established successful retail chains, some founded popular vehicle lines, and some started technology corporations. You might be tempted to conclude from this observation that the best path to great wealth is entrepreneurship. But before you rush out and try to start your own business, let me offer a little bit of caution here. Don't forget to examine the other side. Specifically, how many would-be entrepreneurs end up failing to start a successful business? It turns out that most startups are actually not successful. So entrepreneurship is not really a path to guaranteed wealth. It's a path to taking a high-stakes gamble. And when you recognize that, I think you'll understand a little better how this world really works. Of course, the world's wealthiest people are the lucky winners of high-stakes gambles. Any other outcome would be incompatible with the nature of statistics. So if you are hell-bent on becoming a billionaire, then taking a high-stakes gamble is pretty much your only hope. But if you're really looking for stability and financial prudence, I don't necessarily recommend trying to go through the path of entrepreneurship. Principle 9. Entrepreneurship is a high-stakes gamble. I have known several people who were successful entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, a non-trivial portion of them have turned out to be amoral jerks and have long forgotten why they wanted to be successful in the first place. That's not the path I really want for you, so here's my warning. I suspect entrepreneurship may be a difficult road to follow, and I suspect it may favor people who are willing to compromise their values. You have been warned. Here's another chart I want to show you. On the horizontal axis, it shows about 50 years of time, and on the vertical axis, it plots the total wealth of a few groups of people. The green line shows the total wealth of the bottom 50% of the nation. 50 years ago, they were struggling to stay out of debt, and today, they are struggling to stay out of debt. Not all that much seems to have changed for this group of people. By contrast, the wealthier portion of the nation have managed to grow their wealth exponentially. This chart shows us a few significant things. Obviously, it validates Principle 5. You need money to make money, because those who had it were able to get more of it. And interestingly, all the rich groups were able to grow their wealth exponentially. Those that started out with more ended up with a great deal more. That's kind of what markets do. They make the rich richer. Now, maybe you don't like that. Maybe you think to yourself, capitalism is really harsh, and I wish I were born under some other kind of system. But let me ask, where exactly would that be? Of all the nations on this planet, did you notice that 100% of them actually participate in the global economy? There is really no such thing as a non-capitalistic nation. Principle 10. Capitalism is really the only option. There are, of course, nations that provide some kind of safety net for their citizens who are not very successful as capitalism. And that may sound very nice, but there's also a cost associated with that. The same nations that provide those safety nets for those that aren't very successful at capitalism also tend to impose more limitations on who is actually allowed to participate in capitalism. So either way, if you're starting poor and you want to end up rich, you're going to have to fight for it. No one is just going to give that to you. That's just not how the world works. Another thing this chart shows us is where the wealthy people get their money. There's really only one way to consistently grow your money exponentially, and that is investing. And wealthy people consistently grow their money exponentially, so we know what they're doing. To put that another way, rich people start out in many different professions. Perhaps a lot of them are entrepreneurs, but ultimately, regardless of how they started, they all eventually switch to the same profession of investing. Unfortunately, most people have to start with something else because you can't invest until you have money to invest. But when you do finally get a lot of money, everything else suddenly becomes financially inefficient. Investing is really the only profession for rich people. Of course, if you're rich, you can pay someone else to invest on your behalf. So you can still spend your time doing whatever you love, and you can pretend that whatever you love is your real career. And many rich people do that. But all rich people ultimately derive their flow of money from the same source, investing. Anything else ultimately just becomes a hobby. Principle 11. Your career is just temporary. A lot of people have this weird idea that the purpose of college is to jumpstart your career, and your career is what you should spend the rest of your life doing. My advice is to throw that stupid notion out the window. If all you get out of college is a career, I think you wasted your time and money in college. There are faster paths to making a lot of money, and the purpose of a career is just to jumpstart your future as an investor. That's when you get to spend the rest of your life being an educated person and hopefully having the time and resources to do something worthwhile. Let's imagine that the curves in this chart somehow represent the flow of water in some kind of a river. This river flows forward through time from left to right. You are starting down here, and you want to end up somewhere around here. If you just let the current pull you downstream, you will obviously be carried over here. But that's a little late in the game to start building your investments, isn't it? By that time, the gap is just so big you can't possibly swim across it. Your fate has been sealed. And that's what happens to a lot of people because changing the future is hard and planning is hard. The only way you can possibly cross this river is if you start swimming as fast and hard as you can right now while you are young and poor as dirt, because that's how money works. Remember Principle 6. Knowledge is power, and time turns power into money. So let's talk about how to invest while you are young and as poor as dirt. At this point in your life, you really need to leverage all your competitive advantages. Suppose Alice and Bob are both poor college students. Alice takes a job cleaning out porta potties for, say, $20 an hour. Bob doesn't want to do that nasty job, so he takes a job doing something he loves for just $10 an hour. Bob reasons to himself that his job is helping to build his future career, and besides, he'd much rather work twice as long doing something that he actually loves. But Alice knows that Bob has made a critical reasoning error. See, no one can invest 100% of their money. Everyone needs to eat, and everyone needs to live somewhere. When you are poor, the cost of living consumes a larger portion of your income. And these days, the cost of rent is outrageous. So maybe Alice brings in twice as much as Bob, but how much more does Alice actually have to invest than Bob? The answer, of course, depends on how much it costs to live. If we assume that someone who makes, say, $9 an hour could just barely afford to pay for food and rent, then Bob is really only bringing in $1 per hour of extra income that he can invest, and Alice is bringing in $11 per hour of extra income that she can invest. So Alice is actually building her investment portfolio 11 times faster than Bob. Principle 12. When you are poor, a small edge makes a big difference. Imagine Alice and Bob both trying to swim across this river at its narrowest point. But Alice is swimming 11 times faster than Bob. As they are both carried downstream by the current, where do you imagine they are going to end up? Besides being extremely poor, there's another factor that often stops young people from investing. They often do not see its value. Let's use some numbers to illustrate. Suppose Cindy invests $1,000 for 1 year with an annual percentage yield of 3%. To be clear, 3% is a fairly typical interest rate for a money market. At the end of the year, Cindy will have made $30 from this investment. Cindy says to herself, "That's about the price of a nice pizza." Now let's just think about that for a minute. She invested $1,000 for a full year, and all she got out of that was one pizza? It feels like the biggest ripoff on the planet. So Cindy compares that with the salary she's getting from her job. She can make $30 in like 1 hour, maybe two if she has a very terrible job. But that's still a whole lot less than a full year. So instead of reinvesting that $30, maybe Cindy just enjoys a nice pizza. Is that really such a crime? It's just one pizza in a whole year. Cindy is making a critical reasoning error. Can you see what that error is? I'll give you a moment. The mistake is that Cindy is comparing the income from her investments to the income from her job. But passive and active income are two very different things. In order to get your salary from a job, you have to actually do the job. Of course they're going to pay you more money. You are giving them something very valuable in exchange for that money. You're giving them your time. Passive income is not like that. You do not have to buy it with your time. And since you are only lending your money to get passive income, you can stack it as many times as you have money to lend. Cindy can only do one or maybe two full-time jobs, but there is no limit to how much money she could potentially invest. Principle 13. Never measure passive income against active income. They are just not the same thing. That's like comparing apples to horses. They have completely different properties. If you have a little extra money from your active income, it's really hard to turn that into a higher paying career. But with passive income, you can make that automatic. It climbs the metaphorical ladder whether you are working or sleeping. Pretty much the only property that passive and active income have in common is that they both give you money. And when the money from your passive income is enough to cover the cost of living, something really incredible happens. Suddenly, you don't have to sell your time anymore, ever again. Then you've bought your freedom and your life is yours. So while you're building your career, don't neglect the other one. Principle 14. Simultaneously build both your active and your passive careers. Now let's talk about debt. Everything we've discussed so far is built on the assumption that you can, somehow, find a little extra money somewhere. But the truth is, you probably can't. You're probably in debt. You're probably so far in the hole right now that interest is actually working against you rather than for you. What do you do then? Well, let's take a look at your debts. You gotta buy food. You gotta pay for your credit card bill. You gotta pay your student loans. You need transportation because you've got to get to your job, and you gotta live somewhere. Now, of all these expenses, which one should you focus on? Well, obviously the first debt you should pay off is the one with the highest interest rate. That's probably your credit card. And never go into credit card debt again. Just pay it off in full every month, so you're never paying for interest. You don't want to do that. Remember, interest is paying for nothing. After that, you should probably focus on your home. Why? Because it's the biggest one. Houses these days cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's more than the cost of all those other things combined. Principle 15. Don't be penny wise but pound foolish. If you are eating beans and ramen noodles every day to save money, and you're driving an old junker car, but you're making minimum payments on a 30-year mortgage, you are saving pennies while wasting a fortune. Look at your amortization schedule. Remember Principle 4, do your own math? The amortization schedule will tell you how much of your mortgage payment is going to interest. That's the part the bank gets, and how much of your payment is going to principal. That's the portion of your property that you own. It turns out that 30-year mortgages are set up so that when it's all paid off, you have paid for your house almost 3 times. Now think about it. Of all the things in this whole world that you do not want to pay for 3 times, It's your house. So how do you avoid paying for your house 3 times? Principle 16. Never make a minimum payment. Every time you make a principal payment, you not only buy more of your property, you also reduce future interest payments. This stuff stacks just like investments. The amount won't seem very significant at first. Do it anyway. Each time you do, you lighten the load for doing it next time, and eventually you pay off your whole house. And just to make sure you really can make those extra principal payments, Principle 17, don't start out in the nicest place you can afford. Do not try to match the lifestyle of your parents. That's just not smart. Try to get out of debt faster than they did. Then the lifestyle will follow. At this point, somebody usually asks, hang on a minute, I'm not even ready to buy a house yet. I'm still renting. What about me? Think about it this way. Renting is a lot like making a mortgage payment, except 100% of your payment goes to the landlord and 0% of the payment goes to principal. While you rent, you're basically flushing your money down the toilet. More specifically, you're paying for someone else to earn principal. Principle 18, never rent. Now you might notice that I put a little asterisk after this one. That's because there are actually some cases where the math might tell you that the smartest option actually is to rent. If the math says that, you should listen to the math, but be very careful with that. If your best option is really to pay for absolutely nothing, that's a pretty lousy situation. I'd strongly recommend checking your math a few times before you even accept a situation like that. Ultimately, building wealth is a lot like forming a healthy lifestyle. You don't just get all pumped up about it one day, drink a bunch of nutrition shakes, and then work out until you have big muscles. You have to adopt some kind of lifestyle and steadily work at it over many years. You pay off your debts. Then you use that extra money that you would have used to pay for interest to buy more principal in your home. Eventually you pay off your home. Then you have a lot more extra money and you use those to build investments. When the interest comes in, you reinvest that interest. Slowly but steadily, you gain momentum until one day you find that your passive income exceeds your active income. Principle 19, play the long game. And importantly, as you are playing this long game, don't forget why you are playing it in the first place. Sometimes it takes so long to get there that people start to think their purpose in life is to earn money. Money should never be an end. It should only be a means. If you have nothing else to live for, you have wasted your life. Do something better. Do something that's not for yourself. Even rich people eventually run out of time and die. Let's contemplate a few ways you might choose to make an impact. Did you know that even if you never get rich in your lifetime, you still have the ability to make your great-grandchildren insanely wealthy? All you have to do is not give your money to your children. Remember, because of the way exponential growth works, any amount of money, even a single dollar with a very poor interest rate, will eventually turn into a huge fortune if you just invest it for long enough. And people who recognize this are empowered to make a tremendous impact in the world. Consider the Nobel Prize. How much incredible good has been done for the world just because this prize gave scientists a goal to pursue. If you tried to establish something like the Nobel Prize today, perhaps you wouldn't have enough money to even make it worth anyone's while. But if you established it to activate at some time in the future, whatever amount you have is actually plenty. The mere fact that you live in the present gives you an exponential amount of influence over the future. And while so many people work so very hard to use that power only to benefit themselves, don't forget to contemplate how you might also use that power to benefit others. Sometimes students ask me, is it even financially prudent to go to college? It certainly used to be, but the financial benefit has clearly diminished over time. There are definitely some majors for which college really no longer makes any financial sense. But most importantly, I hope you are not going to college just to get a financial edge. In my mind, that falls approximately in the same category as living just to make money. Education does so much more than just jumpstart a career. It also shapes the kind of person that you are, and that should be deeply intertwined with why you are playing this silly game in the first place. Principle 20. Remember why you are doing it. If you review these principles, I think you'll find that they sound very cliche, almost like those obnoxious motivational posters middle managers like to hang on their doors. I hope you'll recognize that not everything that sounds cliche is necessarily wise, but everything that is cliche is probably cliche for some reason. And when you can identify the reasons, the wisdom is not in the saying, but is in you. And that is the real purpose of these cliche principles. None of them are universally true for every situation and every interpretation, but all of them capture something that is worth trying to understand. So I hope you'll give these principles some deep thought. But of course, this is all just theory, and no one gets to operate in the land of theory. In the real world, where capitalism actually operates, there are a great many practical issues that you'll also need to deal with. You have to deal with taxes and loopholes, and you have to compete with unscrupulous individuals who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal to give themselves an unfair advantage. And it can be very tricky to maintain your character while still trying to be successful in a game that really isn't even fair. Principle 21. Keep learning. Keep refining your strategies. You never know it all. You'll never even know enough, but the more you learn, the better your decisions will be. Learning means admitting you don't know it all. And learning is hard. Learning is inherently painful. But in general, those who are willing to learn end up on top. So never stop learning.